Hi, good morning. I'm attorney Allyson Cohen from Cohen Law Services, Lady Law, and the host of Legalese. You're listening to News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. Number to the studio, 508-755-0058. Number to my office, 508-366-8805. Of course, you can find me on the web at CohenLawServices.com. I'm so excited to be here this morning because I'm celebrating my 5th year anniversary on WTAG and hosting this show. It started out in a way that was absolutely hilarious, and I'm going to share this story with my very good friend, the Colossus of Clout, Jim Polito, who's been kind enough to join me here today. And before we get to that story, Jim, I want to go ahead and toast and say
yes.
Thank you, and
Allyson,
I love you, and God bless you.
I love you too. Happy 5th anniversary. Many, many more. Many, many more. Mazel tov.
Thank you so much.
Good for you.
I'm excited, Jim.
Oh, you tell your story, and I have a quick anecdote that I want to tell. But I've got to tell you, we've got your people here. We've got Dave here. I feel like the king. I'm just sitting back and enjoying and reveling in the 5th anniversary of Legalese.
And that's what the Colossus of Clout should be doing. So when I hosted my first show, the first call out of the box, remember I was a newbie, and I was nervous. I've done trial work. I've appeared before many different courts, but this was a whole different ball of wax. I get a call from a listener who was speaking about an attorney who was, according to this caller, a drunkard, who had been disbarred, and I looked it up afterwards and I confirmed it, and she had left this woman's will and other important papers out in the hallway of her, I guess, dilapidated office, along with her neighbor's will and a whole bunch of other documents. Now, this is my first call, Jim, and I'm sitting there thinking, I'm done, okay? There's absolutely no way I'm continuing on with this debacle, because how do you manage a call like that? Well, I ended up saying, why don't we take your phone number? I will give you the name and the place to call the ethics hotline with the bar, and you can discuss with them how to go about securing your documents and find out what you can do in transitioning out of that ridiculous situation. But talk about trial by fire.
Well, and since then, the show has grown. The popularity of the show has grown. And you know what? That's the best way. You know that. That's the best way to start up. I would expect no less from you, because I've been through some difficult negotiations and things with you, and I would expect no less. And I know since then, people listen to the show. People know about Cohen Law Services. They know about all of the workshops that you do, which I love to attend, and I meet so many nice people. The Lady Law workshops. I think that was a great idea. I have an audience now in Western Mass. You have Western Mass people who I know are listening on iHeartRadio now and who come to your Lady Law workshops because they come to me and say, hi, Jim, I heard about this. Even though this show isn't simulcast, they listen with iHeartRadio. Right. So I say congratulations, Allyson. So let me tell my funny story, which is just, it's so funny. 2 funny stories, and some people have heard the second one before. First one was, when I first met Allyson Cohen, I didn't know that she was a fan of the show. And she came in one morning after my show with some of the people here, and she was talking about starting that show that you just described was baptism by fire. And you said to me, Jim Polito, you should be on Fox News.
Yes, I did say that.
Kidding.
I can't believe you remember this.
The first words out of her mouth were, Jim Polito, you should be on Fox News. And I said, Allyson, please, please, please. Well, lo and behold, how many months later was I on Fox News?
Not many months.
Right. Now, the big mistake, and by the way, when you said that to me, there was a little something going on, but I never expected that Fox 25 would want me to work for them. They were coming to me. Well, 2 things. One, I signed a contract without speaking with Allyson Cohen.
Yes,
because I just thought of Allyson Cohen as an elder law or family law person. Okay, made that mistake. But the second part of it is, I was listening one Saturday morning while I worked at Fox to this show, and Kathy was with me, and I heard, Allyson does employee contract law? I didn't know that.
Right.
Called Allyson Cohen, and the rest is history. And then I came back to, because Fox was sold, I probably could have signed another contract there, but I didn't want to work for the new owners because I'd have to be a reporter probably. Anyway, and then the old Fox didn't want to let me out before the sale, and Allyson Cohen got me out. But I was embarrassed because Kathy went on to, she said, well, haven't you...
She went onto the website.
Yeah, she said, haven't you ever gone onto Allyson's website? And they said,
Jim's like, I don't have time to go on that.
No,
website.
I did not say that.
That's fine.
I said kind of embarrassed. No, honey. She said, Allison's been on the air there for a couple of years, don't you? And we had been out to dinner.
Right,
We had
I
met
know.
socially. And then she said, Jim, she's had stuff before the Supreme Court. She knows her primary area is contract law and employment.
Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
So anyway, Allyson, one more toast
Yes,
to you.
thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
To
Salute.
everything. And so many people know that I say it not just because you're a friend, but because of what the work you've done for me, that Allyson Cohen is a person you should call for these types of issues.
And I appreciate that, Jim, and I
No problem.
appreciate your friendship and Kathy's too. And so what we've been doing together really is going through for the last maybe 2 years now, maybe a little bit more, the coverage of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
And I love it, Jim.
I do
think
too.
it's exciting. I think what we do is we bring to the listening audience a way to understand what's going on in the highest court of our land, and we take out a lot of the legal mumbo jumbo. So I figured I'd jump right in because
Good.
we have a new justice on the bench.
Yes.
And we've talked about Gorsuch and what it took to get him confirmed. But I did a little homework before I was preparing for this show. Now, granted, he has only been listening to cases or been considering cases for the last month, and really just
right.
for the week of April.
The one you did yesterday
Right.
about the veterans, disability benefits,
Yes.
he didn't rule on because the arguments were heard before he was confirmed.
That's exactly right. And unless there is some specific reason for them to allow him to consider a case, if he hasn't sat for the argument, he's not going to rule on it. But here's what's interesting. Since Scalia passed away, and you and I were big Scalia fans.
Very big.
God rest his soul. I thought he was unbelievable. Just a great man, a giant among men. We've talked about it. And at the same time, maybe, and not in a bad way necessarily, but maybe a polarizing force on the court. Here's why I say that, Jim. Because I'm analyzing now the dispositions, the rulings from October of 2016. We're in the October of 2016 term. And there has been about 35 cases that have been decided. We have 15 cases that were decided 8-0. We have,
Wow. Out of 35.
yes, we have 2 cases that were decided 7-0. We have 5 cases that were decided 7-1. We have 6 cases that were decided 6-2, and 4 cases that were decided 5-3. So we haven't had, really in this term thus far, a 4-4 ruling.
Now, I mean, I'm going to ask this. I know you said he's a polarizing force, but did he also have an impact on which cases came to the Supreme Court? I know you have explained to me, Jim,
Yes.
when there's a conflict between 2 appeals courts, it pretty much has to go to the Supreme Court. But there are other cases
Right.
that come up through appeals.
7,000 petitions a year are filed.
Right. Now,
And how many do you think get heard?
yeah, it's, what is it, less than 80?
You got it.
Less than
100, about 100 to 150. So a small minutia
Right.
of cases get heard. So I know what you're thinking.
Yeah, is it the cases he influenced that, let's pick this one?
Right.
Do you think that's what it was?
I don't know. Obviously, he has a vote, like everybody does,
Right.
to decide what cases they're going to accept. They're always looking for areas of the law that are not necessarily politicized, but areas of the law that might be unsettled. But I find it incredibly fascinating to be sitting here and knowing when we get back from the next segment, I'm going to talk a little bit about that case in which Gorsuch had his first ruling. It was the death penalty case. It did come down 5-4, but that was not a case that had been petitioned to the court, right? That went up automatically as a stay of execution.
Okay.
And there was reasonings behind the way that came down, and I understand it. But sans that one, Jim, I'm looking at decisions that have been made in which there has been no 4-4 ties this year.
Wow. And there was, that was the worry all
That was
year.
the worry.
Because you had Scalia gone, you didn't
Right.
have a replacement.
Right. And so here we are. And I think it's important to note that people are fearful sometimes for reasons that aren't provided for, reasons that aren't substantiated. And here's one of them right now. So when we get back, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gorsuch's first decision, and I'm going to talk with you about something that I think you're going to find incredibly interesting. This idea that when a new judge comes on the bench, that the Supreme Court, all of the colleagues, like to assign a decision, a written opinion to a judge, and hopefully all of them will support that new justice in his ruling. Yes. Little tidbit of information, folks, so please don't go anywhere. There's so much more to come. You're listening to News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. Legalese 5-year anniversary show. We'll be right back. To News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. Number to the studio, 508-755-0058. I'm here with the Colossus of Clout, the one and only Jim Polito, my good friend. I'm so fortunate to have met him when the stars must have been shining down on me, and to
on
be
you,
in,
on me.
And Kathy,
Please.
who I absolutely adore, your beautiful wife. I couldn't be happier that you guys are together. Every time I see pictures of the fam, I get goosebumps because it's just a great union, and I feel like good people are coming together to do good things. And so Jim and I always talk about legal aspects of cases, and then we throw in the political side of it, because every case really that is legal has some form of a, it is politicized to a certain extent.
Unfortunately, Allyson, I've talked about this on the air. Every aspect of life is now politics. Entertainment, everything is politics. And frankly, it sickens me. But law has become, you know it.
It has.
It's like scripture. You can have a different interpretation of law. And I guess if you were to ask me about my philosophy, of course, you know I'm not an officer of the court, but I would be a fundamentalist, I guess, when it comes to the
constructionist.
A strict constructionist, the Constitution, period. What does it say? If it doesn't say it there, okay, then you need to pass a law.
Exactly. And so I think where we have ended up right now, at least in my opinion, Jim, is that there is a problem with the checks and balances that are going on in this country, because you've got courts that are making decisions, for example, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, making decisions to strike down things like travel bans that they really might not have that extenuating authority to do, and then ultimately that holds up everything until it's tried and it's tested all the way up.
As you say, the expression, the tied up in the courts.
Yes.
You may be right, and you may have the right argument, but when it gets to the court, it takes time, because it has to be deliberated, it has to be discussed, it has to be researched. And you're right, how many times is the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overturned?
It's an incredible amount of percentages of time, Jim. I don't have the.
I heard 80. I heard 80.
It may be 70 to 80%.
Can you imagine that?
No, I can't.
So that means that's like being a meteorologist, and 70 to 80% of the time you're wrong.
Don't tell that to Tom Baklava.
Tommy is not wrong.
Tommy
doesn't ever
Baklava. No.
Yes. Tommy Baklava.
So, and that gets you to think about this idea of, do we now have judges who are politicians in robes? But I opened the first segment to say, certainly, with what I'm looking at in terms of the decisions before the court this term, it's clear to me that you have a much more cohesive group of folks that are ruling together on cases that I would have never imagined them to stand with, like the veterans case that we talked about this Friday.
Right.
I would have thought for sure the liberal side of the court would have said, listen, you're now cheating the wife out of retirement pay that she thought she'd be entitled to. But instead what they did was, Jim, they looked at the statute. They did what the court is supposed to do.
Exactly.
They looked at the statute, they found authority in the words of the statute, the plain reading of it, and they upheld it on that ground. We may not have liked that decision, they may not even like the decision, but it was a right decision based on the wording of the statute.
Wasn't that the case with Gorsuch? And during his confirmation hearing, the man who was left in the truck and then got fired, the truck broke down, he worked for the company.
Right.
And Gorsuch said they kept trying to hammer him, the Democrats. You think it's okay to leave a coal man? And he kept saying, no, but I interpreted the law. If you want to change the law,
absolutely,
then when a case like that comes to us, there'll be a different decision. But the way that the law was, that's what it meant. And the law isn't supposed to be emotional.
It's absolutely not supposed to be emotional. It's not supposed to be politicized. It's supposed to be there because the legislature has gone ahead and has went into subcommittee. They have gone through the process. They've brought it back through. They've voted on it. They've passed it. And now we go from that place to say, what are these politicians? If that's the laws that have been passed, then the role of the court is to uphold it. And so I thought that was a perfect example, even going back through the history yesterday, because when we talked about the veterans case, they came out in 1981, the Supreme Court said, this is the way the law reads. If you don't like it, do something about it.
Change
the following year, that's exactly what Congress did. So they made an amendment to the law. And that's how things are supposed to work with checks and balances. But if you've got a rogue court, and it's a lower court, rendering decisions that I don't feel they have the authority to render, that's not based on the actual federal law, it's worrisome to me, Jim. It's worrisome.
It's emotional decisions.
Right.
I think of Al Franken, the crazy senator from Minnesota, with all due respect, over and over again saying to Neil Gorsuch, "You would leave a man in a truck?" And Gorsuch just calmly trying to say, this isn't about leaving a man in a truck. This is about the law. If you want a different decision in future cases, you need to change the law. That's your job, not my job.
Exactly. And so that brings me to what I was reading that I think is incredibly interesting about this idea that the new justice that comes on the bench with his colleagues is supposed to, when they're assigned their first opinion to write, is supposed to hopefully have a unanimous decision of the court.
Wow.
So they try and find cases. This is interesting because remember, 7,000 petitions a year. Only 100 to 150 at the most are accepted. And now a new justice comes aboard, and they're trying to find a case that they can hand over to that justice who will author that majority opinion and hopefully have all of the justices join. So I want to give you a couple of small facts because I think you'll think this is very interesting. Current members of the court who had that exact same experience, had all of them go ahead and support them when they had their rulings, when they first got on the court, included, I believe, Antonin Scalia.
Okay.
It included Clarence Thomas. It included Justice Kennedy. It didn't include Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Her first case in 1993, it was decided 6-3. It didn't include Justice Stephen Breyer's first case in 1995. That was 7-2. So when I was reading one of these articles, it was saying, well, it looks like the Republican appointees or the Republican nominees had their first opinions that were supported unanimously, while several of the Democratic nominees did not. Okay, maybe that's the fact.
Maybe that is the case.
But in any event, to me, thinking about this idea of kind of throwing a case up there like a lob,
yep,
and hoping that you can get one where everybody's in a unanimous decision
for your maiden
yes,
voyage,
is absolutely peculiar. I'm not sure how comfortable I am with it, because what is it that we're saying? I mean, I guess it's kind of a rite of passage, but really?
Wouldn't we still want to hear the dissenting opinion?
Yes.
It's like when a new member is elected to the general court in Massachusetts on Beacon Hill, and they make their maiden speech, their first speech. It's a tradition that the speaker calls everyone in, a roll call, and everyone who's in the building is supposed to come in and be present, and they're supposed to give a standing ovation. Now, does that have any impact on the laws that are made during that session? No, it's a tradition. This one, to me, though, seems like...
I don't know.
I want to hear the dissenting opinion.
If there is a dissent, no, wait.
Right. If there
Let's think
is
about it. We opened
right.
up the show. Let's go back to the stat pack, because this is important, folks, that you understand that right now we are in the October term. So cases come up to the court. They are listed for the October term.
Right.
In this case, it's 2016. They are heard all the way through the end of April. Decisions are issued as they go along. Then we have the Super Bowl, because by June 25th, 26th, they wrap it up. Yeah.
And they release all the biggest ones that we're all wondering
that they're
about.
Holding, like the Trinity Lutheran Church case.
Isn't it like a mini series, and then you have the cliffhanger until the last episode?
Yes. So in that way, maybe there's more drama than even politics, although politics is drama. But it's interesting to see, again, with this court, 15 cases so far this year decided 8-0. 15 times, Jim.
I know, Allyson.
And 2 times they were 7-0, which means one of the judges had to recuse themselves for some reason. So really, it's 17 unanimous verdicts. 5 cases 7-1.
That's insane.
I know. 6 cases 6-2. 4 cases 5-3. And folks, other than the one that we were talking about, which wasn't a case that was petitioned, it came up under an emergency stay, which was to stay in execution. And Gorsuch did weigh in, and he got a lot of flack for it. He weighed in on his first case, of course, and he actively supported the conservative side in allowing the execution to take place and go forward. And they had a lot of, unfortunate press coverage for him, but I think he did what he felt was right within the confines of the law.
Yeah.
So Interesting stuff. Jim.
Now the tea leaves are now going forward.
Now going forward.
Yeah.
Now going forward.
Now they're going to get down to business. He's had his maiden
Yes,
voyage. He's
yes.
had his everything else.
Yes.
Now what happened?
And so he has taken part in 13 cases between April 17th and April 26th. So 13 cases now that he will weigh in on. And I think it will be incredibly interesting to see how this stat pack plays out, because we still have some big cases before the court. Remember, we had the Slanson.
Oh, that's right.
That case has not been decided.
How can you trademark a racial slur?
Yes, exactly. And that case is being deemed as one of the major cases of this sitting.
I would think of it. You know, I heard the show.
Right.
Now, I've heard your opinion of it. I've thought about it. Why can't you trademark that?
Right.
I always go back to what Antonin Scalia said, what you've taught me too about him, is Antonin Scalia always said, who decides?
Right.
His biggest question was always, who decides? Is it us? Is it the legislature? Who decides? And then when it was a question of freedom of speech, well, who decides?
Right.
And I guess you could trademark a name that is, if that's your band and that's your name. Now, isn't it difficult sometimes, though, to trademark a name that would be something common? Like, I
Absolutely.
can't trademark table.
Of course not.
Table is
It's table.
table.
Right.
But if I come up with a foldable invisible table, maybe I can trademark that. But this is a term. I don't think it's as simple as table. I mean, it's not.
Exactly, and I think
That's why it's intriguing.
It is intriguing, and I think it brings us to what we'll talk about in the third segment, Jim, is this idea of regulation and over-regulation. Because remember, this came out of the Patent and Trademark Office. They're operating
Right.
pursuant only to regulations, right?
Right.
They've been set up. They're an agency that operates through rules and regulations, and they found their own little peculiar part of a regulation in which they felt that it supported it. Whether it did or didn't, that's another question. And then this idea of over-regulation, which I think has been really shifting us in a sad state of affairs, or in a poor direction for a number of years. So I want to talk a little bit about that and your thoughts on that when we get back.
Sure. Thanks.
All right, sounds good, folks. Please don't go anywhere. So much more to come. You're listening to Lady Law on News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. Legalese 5-year anniversary show. We'll be right back. Hi, welcome back. I'm attorney Allyson Cohen, Lady Law from Cohen Law Services, and the host of Legalese. You're listening to News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. So glad you tuned in this morning for my 5-year anniversary show. I am graced with the presence of the Colossus of Clout, my good friend. I love talking to him every Friday morning. I get more compliments, more emails. People stop me to say, I love when you're on the Colossus of Clout. They even use Jim's name in that colloquialism, and I just think it's fantastic. I was at the Senior Center hosting a little thing there recently, and the people came up and they said, we love to hear you on the Colossus, and we love when you put that big pie in his face. And it's just, it's so cute because they're watching. They're not just listening, they're watching.
That picture of the pie in the face in that series, that's on my, in your social media where you pick the most important, 5 most important pictures. That's one of them, the pie in my face.
That was for autism, acceptance. Right.
Acceptance, yeah.
Amazing. So when we went to break, we were talking a little bit about this idea of regulations, but I did want to circle back around on one thing to make sure we're giving accurate statistics. So thus far this year, we were talking about the overturned cases in the 9th Circuit, folks. That's out in the California region. And it looks like only 20% of their cases were affirmed. 80% were overturned.
Oh, so then we were no.
Yeah.
So that's an
80% of their cases were reversed, Jim.
accuracy rate. Okay. That's an 80. So I want everyone to think about
that. An 80% inaccuracy rate. Yeah.
Well, right.
Right.
So a car manufacturer is building cars. At the end of the assembly line, 80% of them don't start.
Right.
Have to go back to the beginning of the assembly line and be reworked. And that, to me, is an activist court. If you're a 50-50, then maybe, but an 80-20,
and
no.
when you're looking at the total amount of cases that come up to the court, they accept more cases from that court than anywhere else. So you've got because they know, Jim, you've got an overwhelming amount coming out of the 9th Circuit. Whereas take our circuit, for example, the 1st Circuit, only one case got up thus far this year.
That's it. One case in this region,
and it was affirmed. So we're 1 for 1.
So they have 100. They're batting 1,000.
They're batting 1,000. But the 9th Circuit, not so much. So this idea of the travel ban, let's touch on that for a moment, because obviously this has been a big thing in the news. Being able to issue regulations and being able to issue executive orders, and this started really rolling out around George W. Bush's time, where there was a lot of executive orders that started coming into play. And
after 9/11.
After 9/11, and it made sense in many circumstances. And then, of course, you know, the former president, Barack Obama, had many, many executive orders. And now we've got President Trump, Donald J. Trump. He is in and he's issuing executive orders, but in ways that are a little bit different than the previous 2 presidents or 3 presidents or 4 presidents, because he's rolling back regulations.
As opposed to creating new regulations.
Yes. He's rolling them back, which is really in terms of what his mindset is to, you know, advance the economy, how businesses work. And I've told you this, and we've talked about it. As a small business owner, you are laden with regulations.
Oh, when you've told me in simple terms the very way that a person, what they have to go through to start a business, and it is, forget about what you're actually good at and what the business is.
Right.
You don't have time. I don't understand how you would have time for that.
Right. And so it becomes a strong, like a stranglehold in trying to operate your business in a way that's meaningful, because you're always nervous, and I'm advising employers all the time, they're always nervous that they are not living up to one more regulation. And you've got, for example, the National Labor Relations Act, and the NLRB, and the National Labor Relations Board.
Yeah.
And so regulations that have been coming out of there for years with this broad sweeping authority affecting the way businesses operate. You've got the EPA, and folks don't realize we've got our own EPA here in Massachusetts. So when you've got
DEP.
Yes, when you've got the broad regulations coming out of Washington, folks that don't live locally, that don't know how we operate, that's when I'm, of course, holding up my 10th Amendment flag to say, 10th Amendment says we reserve all those powers that we don't really need to utilize to the states.
Well, hasn't that been the argument? Because it's one thing if Congress passes a law. It's another thing when an agency takes that law, turns that law into bureaucracy, interprets that law in a set of regulations. Where's my recourse?
Right.
My recourse is, I think the only recourse is, as we see people going to court and forget about it, the average employer going to court and having to, it's impossible. And that's one of the things that I have liked about Trump, is that he understands that, and there are a lot of individuals. I think there are some good people who may be liberal, and obviously some folks who are conservative who say, wait a minute, that wasn't the law.
Exactly. And
the
it
law
wasn't the
said
intention.
this.
Right.
And who do I argue with when I go up against this bureaucracy? What is this, King George all over again? George III?
And that's what it feels like with the administrative agencies, at least to me, Jim, that they've been giving a little bit too much, and I'm underscoring the word too much, authority in creating regulations. Now, lawmakers will tell you, how do you implement the law if you don't have regulations?
Right.
Okay, I get that. But not at the rate where we're at 187,000 pages now, I believe, in the Federal Register.
Isn't that insane?
How do you even read through that? As an attorney, I'm keeping up on things. But look at Medicare, for example. And I do a lot with Medicare. The amount of regulations that have come down. And then here's what's really problematic. You have things in which you've got interpretations of regulations that aren't even there. You've got people making decisions about things that they shouldn't be, like we've talked about it on my show, the unlawful, I call it the unlawful improvement standard, that you have to be improving in order to get 100 days of skilled care in a nursing facility. But it doesn't say that anywhere in the Medicare regulations.
And it doesn't. And I say, of course, I have advertisers, and one in particular who is a skilled nursing facility. And I'm taking time in the advertisement educating people.
Right.
That you realize if they put your loved one in for observation, they're not in the hospital for 3 days, you're not eligible for that 100 days in the skilled.
Right.
But the other part of this education is saying to the loved one, if your mom, dad is in the hospital for 3, 4, 5 days, now in the hospital, you can demand that benefit, and that she or he is not ready to go home. And believe me, I know it because of elderly parents.
Right. I know.
And I've learned it, and I worked in healthcare and Medicare HMOs in my previous life. But these are the very simple things I'd like that you bring up, because who do you turn to?
Right. Right.
There's a nameless, faceless bureaucrat somewhere making a decision. And for the average person, they say, wait a minute, I thought I always had recourse in this country.
Right. And so if we tie it back into what we think about with the Supreme Court that you and I talk about on every Friday, if you can get to the court, Jim, if you can get to the court, and you can have the court rule and say, this makes no sense, like they do 80% of the time in the Ninth Circuit.
In the Ninth Circuit.
Which is where these travel bans came out, no
Yep.
less. But in the meantime, what damage has been done? Because it's that waiting game. Let me say this with Medicare. If you've been denied that occupational therapy, that physical therapy,
Right.
that speech therapy, because you haven't been quote unquote improving, even though the Medicare regulations don't say anything about that, you could be deteriorating. You could be status quo, and you should still be entitled to that 100 days, but you can't get that time back. So they'll cut the OT, they'll cut the PT, they'll cut the speech therapy, and you can't regain that time. So even if we win in a Medicare appeal, which I do many times,
I know.
you can't collect back those amount of weeks. And so that's the frustrating part of what's going on with the amount of regulations that we now have in this country.
I think that's one of the, I mean, you've broken a lot of wonderful things on this show, and we're celebrating the 5th anniversary. I think that's one of the best because there's so many of us who are either older listening to this show, who are in those circumstances, or you're someone like myself who has parents, or you're someone who's younger, a millennial, saying, oh my God,
Right.
I didn't know the system worked like that.
Right.
What am I going to do when my parents get older? And one of the best things you've done, I think, is that 100-day benefit. Because during Obamacare, and I know this is going to get wonkish, they set up these accountability groups. And a hospital is now accountable for it. You've got to get this person in and out as quick as possible, and you need to reduce the number of people who leave your hospital and go to skilled nursing facilities. Right. And the incentive is on the hospital financially to do that. And I've got nothing against hospitals. I'm not knocking hospitals. That's what they were presented with under Obamacare. And these are all those wonkish things people don't understand. And what it means is the case manager or the social worker now may not be so forthcoming with, well, you know, maybe your mom could go to the Jewish home or Farallon or Life Care Center or whatever.
And those transitions then create such problems.
And I think that's a wonderful thing you do for people with that. That information here delivered free every day, and you pound those points home.
Oh my gosh, because I feel so,
I know.
I'm personally upset about it in a way that's...
Oh, I know, you're not doing it. This is a more of a mission for you.
Oh,
no, I know.
It is.
I know.
All right, folks, we have one more segment for the 5th anniversary show. Please don't go anywhere. There's so much more to come. You're listening to Lady Law on News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. Myself and the Colossus of Clout will be right back. Hi, welcome back. I'm attorney Allyson Cohen from Cohen Law Services, Lady Law, and the host of Legalese. You're listening to News Radio 580 AM, 94.9 FM, Worcester's news, weather, and traffic station. So glad you tuned in. If you have a question for Lady Law or the Colossus of Clout, 508-755-0058. You know, Jim, one of the things that I feel that we do really well together is that we are able to look at a situation, whether that be a case before the Supreme Court, whether that be something that's happening in Congress, something that's happening with the president, talk about the political side and the legal side of what is, you know, transpiring. And so if you have to think back so far in this 120 days, and I know we're short on time, but what would you consider to be the most consequential event that's taken place since President Trump has been inaugurated?
Oh, it's very simple. It's Neil Gorsuch.
I agree 100%.
And I'll use what you just described. Donald Trump, President Trump, has had feverish executive orders, but the majority of those executive orders have been overturning the executive orders of his predecessor.
Right.
An executive order is a piece of paper. It's nothing. A member of the Supreme Court is almost forever.
Right.
And that is the biggest thing he's done. And I still say to people who are critical of Trump, and you know I'm critical of Trump, but who say, and I say, well, remember now, if you had Hillary Clinton right now, you would have a different member of the Supreme Court.
Right.
You would have an Elena Kagan, a Sonia Sotomayor, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. No doubt. And if he puts another member on that court, right into the next generation. I mean, it's already right into the next generation, but it will be long-standing. That's the biggest impact. Just like you've always said to me, the biggest impact you can leave on the world is your kids.
I I agree with everything you're saying, and not just because you're my friend.
No, I've learned it from you.
But ultimately, that is completely correct. To me, all of these other things that are happening, including this recent scandal in terms of what's going on with James Comey and the FBI, and I was listening to Alan Dershowitz, who I feel like has finally woken up and seen the light. He does
often see the, and even Dennis Case, Kasich has said, we have a shadow government inside leaking information.
Right, and
he's as left as they come.
Oh my gosh! And I think even in terms of Alan Dershowitz, following him my whole life and being so disgruntled with the fact that he's been so liberal, in terms of what his thought processes were, and then realizing that he made a complete about-face when that UN resolution came out in December, which we had not stood with Israel, creating now anybody that's going to pray at the Western Wall, that's going to the Hebrew Hadassah Hospital, that's going to attend the Hebrew University to be in flagrant violation of international law, if they're a Jew doing any of those things. That insanity, I think, shocked him into waking up, but I was listening to him even recently, and one of the things that I do like about him, at least now from what he's saying, is there's got to be this thing called evidence. So we've got a lot of investigations going on now.
Where's the evidence?
We need evidence, Jim. We need evidence.
Show it to
and
me.
Maybe there's bad decision making, but that's not evidence of a violation of a criminal statute.
Bad decision making, bad messaging, not consistent messaging. Those things your enemies can seize upon. As they say, if you know someone's going to beat you, don't hand them the stick.
Right.
And I said Kasich, it's Kucinich, Dennis Kucinich. I think I said Kasich by mistake. I don't know why, but Dennis Kucinich, who the other day said, I'm very afraid. This leaking has got to stop. We have a dark state, and he's not a tinfoil wearing conservative. He's a tinfoil wearing leftist.
That is when you actually feel like, okay, something's going on here that actually makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It was like the ruling that we had discussed a couple of weeks ago, where you had petitions in support of this. Basically in support of something in which you've got the left and the right on the same side, and it's hard to see people like Nancy Pelosi agreeing with Ted Cruz. That to me is unheard of.
And you started the whole show with the Supreme Court and the 35 cases that they've had, and that the majority of them were either unanimous or very close to unanimous, with a few exceptions.
Right. So I think that Neil Gorsuch, who was a phenomenal choice, he was lauded by so many of his colleagues, even at Harvard, which we know is very liberal university, as most of them are. But I believe wholeheartedly that he will make a great addition, that he will continue on in a path that Scalia would be proud of. And to me, that was the most important transition. And so whatever goes forward from this point, I'm already happy in 120 days. So I will put that forward and say, let's hope.
If he does nothing else and he gets one more person on the Supreme Court, I will be happy.
So will I, Jim. So I want to thank you.
Oh, congratulations, Mazel Tov.
Yes, thank you, buddy.
It's wonderful. You are the best. I wouldn't be here without you.
Appreciate everything, and we're going to be together for the Super Bowl in June.
Oh, I can't wait.
All the
full hour.
cases.
We're going to do a full hour on the show.
We've got some big stuff coming up still sitting there, like that Lee versus Tam case, really exciting, and the Trinity Church case. Oh, yes. Good stuff. That will be important because we'll see about Gorsuch's ruling on that one.
Yeah.
All right, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. Want to wish everybody a happy, healthy week. God bless you. Legal ease, Lady Law. We'll see you next week.